All right, everyone, it's time to issue a bit of a rebuttal to people who are still stuck on thinking that Bernie Sanders' health care plan is actually going to be a good thing for the United States if it were implemented. Now, I can tell you, I don't think Bernie is going to be the nominee. If he is, I don't think he wins against Trump. And if he does, he'd have to fight an uphill battle against his own fucking party to get something like this passed. It tried single payer in Vermont and it was shafted, even though we have a liberal supermajority in the House and the Senate, and at the time a Democratic governor who was working with none other than Jonathan Gruber, who tried to scam the state and had to settle out of court and pay us like $400,000 that he had overbilled. These people are charlatans. But let me give a little bit of a rebuttal, and you can actually go to Bernie Sanders' own website for this. And I mentioned this briefly yesterday in a different video, but I wanted to have a dedicated video on the topic for people who may not see the former one. Bernie Sanders' Medicareforall proposal, he claims, like the pie in the sky claim is, well, it'll save $1.4 trillion over the next 10 years. You know, basically, you know, in what would be increased costs as opposed to the healthcare system we have now. Now, of course, my answer to the current healthcare crisis is more capitalism. Drive the costs down, get rid of, you need tort reform, you need regulatory reform, strip some of that back. You definitely need to break up some of the monopolies within the medical industry. You definitely need to allow drug reimportation, cross-national border competition. That'll lower prices, especially for devices and certain services. You need to do all of these things, encourage cross-state competition. And then you need to also reform patent law, especially with regards to medication. If you can accomplish those things, you don't have a problem with healthcare anymore. Private insurance would be so much cheaper. It would be well within the means of even the working class. As far as those that are really impoverished, give them a direct subsidy. It'd cost a tiny fraction of what we already subsidize the healthcare industry with. The thing is, the government wants control over it because all those monopolistic pharmaceutical corporations and big hospitals and administrative groups, they pay political campaigns, so they don't want to crack the monopolies apart. They bought the government, that's the problem. But anyway, that pie-in-the-sky claim, which I sincerely doubt that it would actually save anything. I think it would cost more. But let me take that claim seriously. Let me for a moment suspend my disbelief and say, okay, Bernie wants to save $1.4 trillion with his healthcare reform package. Okay, let's say you implement it. How is it saving the money? The only way in which you can arrive at that total is to increase the business tax rate by 4%. And by the way, this isn't going to affect Amazon. It's not going to affect Walmart. The multinational firms will keep using tax havens. They're not going to pay fucking jack shit. Their employees will, but they won't. No, it'll be small and regional businesses doing that, and they also have to contribute towards people's health care and stuff. It's going to be very, very funny to see half of them go out of business. So yeah, when you have rising, spiraling rates of unemployment and underemployment again, like you did in the last recession we had, don't blame me and don't blame capitalism like, people like to do. Number two is you have to raise the income tax rate on individuals. Now, Bernie Sanders deftly avoids mentioning that if you raise the upper brackets, you have to raise the lower. And by the way, I talked to Chris Whalen, my CPA friend there. I'm like, am I crazy or is this sound economic strategy? Like, if you raise the uppermost rate by 20 points, wouldn't you have to at least raise the lower ones at least a little bit? Like people that are working class? Oh yeah, you would. I mean, it's only common sense. Otherwise, people would they would squirrel all their money away to the Cayman Islands, Romney style, if they made any money at all. So instead of Bernie Sanders saying, well, the tippy tops would have a marginal tax rate of 60%, which I believe it's 50 or 60 he lists, and people below that 40 and then 30. So in other words, a person making a couple $100,000, which, trust me, it sounds like a lot of money, but after taxes and fees, I'm assuming probably a little less. You're telling me that they're going to have to start at an effective tax rate of like 35-40%? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I have a feeling a lot of those people will renounce their citizenship. And that's not a joke. They can go right across the border to Canada and pay a lower tax rate than you're suggesting. So you want Canada to be the most business-friendly in the Americas, or Brazil or something. That's going to be quite a show. It'd be really funny if the United States, without being business-friendly, would not be a very fun place to be now, would it, for a lot of people? So it's bullshit. The only way you can arrive at that estimated total of savings, and that's assuming you take it seriously, is through massive tax increases. So basically what Sanders is saying is, hey, I want to raise everyone's taxes and give you shitty health care, which will be rationed, by the way. Do you think once the market is flooded with all of these millions of new people, you think that won't lead to higher waiting times for most basic forms of care? You'll get the basics, like in socialist countries. Usually the healthcare system for basic things is pretty good. Like if you go to Cuba, yeah, you can get a crate load of inhalers really cheap. As far as getting your basic pills, your basic care, basic like dentistry, like get a cavity filled, yeah, the healthcare system is pretty good for stuff like that. Now try going in for some, now try going in for an organ transplant or for elective surgery or anything like that. Ultimately the problem is people like to own things. People like to make their own decisions. To an extent, they also beckon authoritarianism, which I think is a negative thing about certain people. But generally speaking, they're like, hey, I produced, I did my productive thing, I went to work, I invented something, I wrote a book or whatever, I made money, I should be able to spend it on what I fucking want to. If I want healthcare, I'll get it. If I don't want it, why is the government trying to nanny me? Leave me alone. And it'll be shitty healthcare too. So basically what Bernie Sanders' bullshit plan boils down to is if we raise taxes massively, we can actually save money. But that's not saving money, that's just raising taxes and creating a new entitlement. It just happens that the tax increases, which are massive, will outweigh that. And that's only a claim. And I don't think that it's a true claim, because what will happen is if you raise taxes to that onerous level, if you really want to increase taxes on some small business by 4 points at this current moment, and if you were to raise the margin, the marginal tax rate on even middle income earners, like people that are earning, like fucking, 100K a year is basically upper middle class at this point. If you want to raise their taxes to that degree, a lot of jobs will dry up. Some of those people, you're talking about, well, I want to raise the taxes on this earner to 60%. Okay, so you want that small business owner to make the tough decision of saying, well, I got 10 employees, I can only keep like 6 of them. I can't afford to pay the rest. You want to raise minimum wage to $1,000 an hour too, probably, because he's a socialist. It's not going to work. No, that business will cut a few employees. They'll cut corners. That person will take a pay cut themselves just to bump themselves down out of that tax bracket. People will work less. Yes, there will be. We would literally be disincentivizing productivity. That's exactly the opposite of what we should do. No, what we should do is privatize the healthcare system as much as possible. It works for everything else. If government were to get involved, like in the publishing industry, the books I sell on Amazon would cost $50 a pop, probably. Therein lies your problem. And then I'd still only be getting like, a couple dollars a copy. It's not like I would be the one benefiting. No, the government would, because it's a fucking parasite. It's a leech. It's like a tumor. That's about all. Peace out.